So today has really been put together as an opportunity to really bring growers up to speed with the opportunities that are brought together by enabling your combine to be measuring grain protein. So the theme of today is really powered by protein and how the CropScan grain analyzer is now being part of a precision ag um, tech suite and how it can be utilized on your farm to really drive this protein to prescription story and really starting to join the dots on that. There was a prior webinar which ran through some of the hardware of the crop scan, where now we've collected that data. Now, what do we do with it? And that's where the power of the data really comes alive. So today we're really going to cover off on what does that grain protein have to do with nitrogen. A lot of the time when you hear about crop scan, it's sort of happening at the same time as hearing about nitrogen and variable rate nitrogen. So how does that link together? How does something that we're collecting at harvest from the year before start into impacting how we manage that subsequent crop? Critically, we want to make sure we're getting your data to flow in the right direction, because as soon as we've got a good data flow, it makes all this data that you've got existing and anything new all come together in a usable form. Part of that is linking in with your machinery portal. All roads lead to Rome. We've got to be thinking about our machinery portals as our master digital farm, or that center of the farm operation, is coming from that digital farm. And we're fortunate to have Tony Blair from CNH to run through field ops and how that, as an example, is linking in and integrating with the CropScan solution. And then what's really exciting, we do have a grower panel today, which is really hits home on how growers in the real world are using this technology to start making informed decisions and having impact on their overall crop production. So I want to start with just some of the basics on the data, but really bring it home with some of that grower panel. Please use the chat for any questions. We've got a bit to run through with the growers, but if you have any questions as well, do put them forward. So let's wind it back. Nitrogen is one of your main inputs, but we've got to be thinking about that as nitrogen is driving that grain production. So nitrogen really is that fuel in the fuel tank that maximizes that grain production. But critically, it's not just an Australian thing, but globally, 30% of farmland is under and over fertilized. So for us, we see that as the low-hanging fruit, or the opportunity that we want to help support growers navigate. And we can only do that once we start looking into their harvest data. So protein, what is protein? Protein really is a measure of the nitrogen that has gone through to the grain. And we all know that when we see that variation in protein, we know different soil types or effects have impacted that area of the field. But once you strip it all back, protein is the indicator to assess that fuel or nitrogen that's been available to the crop. And that's the simplicity of the system that we're bringing together. So traditionally, yield has been the lead indicator for crop performance, which makes sense, right? Like, we're being paid for the total volume of grain that we're bringing off the field. But once we've got that in the silo, how are we doing like managing that data any differently, or that field any differently because of that information? Are we rinse and repeat? Are we just replacing what's been removed? How do we know if we've got 5-ton crops that are going 100 kilometers an hour, but it's how many years can it go at 100 kilometers an hour for? That's where the protein starts coming into play. So yield, critical metric we still need to measure. It's giving us overall soil performance, that moisture efficiency, and how do we rank a season? Was it a 4-ton year or was it a 6-ton year? Still a critical piece of the puzzle. But to tell us what comes next is where protein has been this missing insight. Because once you match protein, which we've got to think about like fuel in the fuel tank, and the fuel being nitrogen in this case, we want to be thinking that that fuel in the fuel tank is what's driving that yield. So could we have exceeded the yield average that we achieved? 100% if we know how much fuel's in the tank. So that's where it's working hand in hand. And we'll step through how does this protein data, which is the fuel, how does that actually link to that soil system and overall metrics? Because critically, once you have yield and protein, when we think about how we're fertilizing for crops, we're picking a target yield and a protein target, and that defines our nitrogen we're applying. So why aren't we unwinding that and reverse engineering that calculation at the end of the year and say, well, what were we fertilizing for, and did we hit it? And we need yield and protein to answer that. So we get our nitrogen removal metrics, we can start really honing in on that nitrogen use efficiency and ultimately the farm profitability. And there is a lot more discussion happening around the emissions and carbon intensity scoring on farm. And nitrogen is one of those main levers a grain grower has to pull. So we want to be knowing more and more about nitrogen and how efficient it is being used on farm. So when we strip it all back, like this is agronomy 101, a nitrogen response curve, that as we're seeing the nitrogen rate is increasing, we'll see an increase in protein, which correlates with an increase in yield. So really, when we're analysing fields, the first port of call is to hone in on saying, where have we got some low protein grain coming in? Because if we've got low protein grain, quite often when we have low protein, it's been generally in the higher performing area, like it's grown the yield and it's started to run out of nitrogen to park into protein. So what we want to be then using that as an indicator is say, if we've got some low protein grain, doing 9-10%, if our target's sort of 11.5 commonly here in Australia, is when we're down in this low protein zone, we want to be looking at that as saying, well, if we have more nitrogen available, it should also correlate with a yield response. And typically what we're seeing is around 300 to 600 kilos of yield response per percentage of protein below our target. So that's really some of the metric we're seeing coming from East Coast to West Coast when we start reviewing this data. So, and starting with that, we've got these high protein then zones. So what we want to be thinking about is how can we use the same paddock spend on fertilizer? So we've got our 100 kilos that we're trying to apply to a field. By using protein, how can I better allocate that to use some of that high protein zone, which is also correlating with the high soil nitrogen levels. So if we're not removing it in that year before, in that year of harvest, it will still be there in that soil system in general. So that's what's helping give us confidence in utilize this protein data to have that season on season benefit, which some of the growers will highlight later on.
CropScan Ag presents Protein to Prescription. At CropScan Ag, we believe precision farming starts with understanding your crop's true potential, right down to the protein level. Protein isn't just about quality, it's a powerful indicator of nutrient status. The yield to protein response curve illustrates crop response to nitrogen. In the low protein zones, added nitrogen increases both yield and protein. Once nitrogen is adequate, yield plateaus, and further nitrogen primarily increases grain protein. This informs precise nitrogen management. That makes protein a real-time gauge of how much nitrogen was in the plant at harvest. By overlaying protein data onto yield maps, we unlock insights that yield data alone can't provide. This creates our protein by yield correlation quadrant map. Each quadrant tells a different story. Is your crop nitrogen limited, or was it held back by moisture stress or subsoil constraints? With protein data, we can see the why behind the what. These field performance zones identify where nutrition or moisture is limiting yield. So, from here, you can begin to make smarter fertilizer decisions. Start with identifying the N-limited areas of the field or the yellow zones. Now using a fertilizer variable rate strategy, you can increase rates in the yellow zones and decrease in the blue zones. Once the fertilizer prescription is made, you can send it to your connected machinery platform. The goal: place fertilizer in the right place and at the right rate. Evening out your protein zones. Increase yields and profits. Variable rate fertilizer practices can have a return of 2 to 3 times of the cost of the additional fertilizer. With CropScan Ag, protein isn't the end result, it's the beginning of smarter decisions. It's time to turn protein into your most powerful data layer.
So that's the snapshot of bringing together what we've been touching on here this morning. This video will be available to share to refresh you on how we're using this protein data flowing through. But really, as we think about it, on this protein prescription journey, we're really thinking about the nitrogen management strategy and looking at this year-on-year effect. We're thinking of the measurement, we're collecting that with the yield and protein. We're going to analyze that data. What is it telling us? Can we get those quadrants, that high yield, low protein, low yield, high protein? And then it's a matter of acting on it. So having confidence to apply. And really, as we then go through this journey of this year-on-year validation, we can see that improvement tracking through. the end of the day, we're dealing with soils and crops which are influenced by the environment and the rainfall that's met with them. So we've got to work within those soils to be able to see that evening out. So we'll see different results, people coming on, like dabbling in some crops in the first year, acting on that data and seeing it then flow through to improve performance and really evening out that variability from that high protein to low protein. We just want to work on tightening that up because consistency is key with any of the input management. And if we're looking at that quality and the quantity metrics, we're really having an impact on the two sort of levers and metrics that we're getting judged on when we're going and delivering grain at the end of the day. So the data all starts to sort of come together and make sense once we're sort of in the header, collecting that information and working our way through. Where a lot of this data management has happened since the dawn of yield monitors has been that data not going beyond the combine, and that data being that the harvester being the key data collection tool at the end of the season to benchmark all that you've done during that year to then just sit there. And we found that too, even with the CropScan data, is that we're getting some really good information still stuck there on the combine. But now, as the whole evolution of the digital farm and managing all of that information has been a key step in trying to make this all simpler. And what we want to touch on today is really going through managing this friction point, because this is where it's the straw that breaks the camel's back when it comes to actually the action part of this. And getting this part right can make your whole experience far smoother. So in the case of today, we'll be working through the CNH Field Ops platform, and there are other machinery platforms available as well. So pick your target on those. We then use those boundaries coming from that machinery platform. We don't recreate that. We just need a standardized grower, farm, field, and boundary format. And then we work with that. It's called an API. So a connection, a handshake that we do as CropScan and the Engage app with the machinery portal to bring that information in. Then all your protein data, the yield data, all matches in with the right spot. Then from a year-on-year effect, all that data is accumulating in the right location to then make it simple to access. So really a critical checklist for you, if we think about as we go into the next step, is get your digital farm set up now. Like, we want to be working on that and make sure it's not something that happens after harvest, because data collected without some of this basic information is a lot harder to manage. We want to sync with all your machines on the farm, get everything updated at the same time. Now, times we see multiple accounts set up on different farms. Do share in with other people in your business and agronomists and alike, because the more they're connected with your information, the more they can start supporting you on that as well. And we want to prepare for prescription. You don't want to say, I just want to do a prescription on the 10th of July as you're booting up the spreader to go out in the field. We want to have this ready, and it's all in a methodical way to start getting that data to really come into action in the field. So I'm going to take this opportunity to run through how we're managing the data in the Engage app, which is available through the App Store through Google Play and through the Apple App Store. And if you do have a computer or a PC that is able to host apps as well, then you can also download that from there. So if we jump into the Engage app, this is simply what we see. So when we have a look at Engage, we have synced in these boundaries from a machinery portal. So this portal has been connected with the CNH Field Ops, which will flow through into how we're managing that data when Troy talks on it shortly. So what we want to be doing is, this is our master digital farm. We want that data to all fall into place. Then we can start acting on that information. So here's a field, and this is what we start seeing. This is some protein data collected, and then we can also have the yield data. Once that's in there, yes, we can see some different trends on what yield and protein is doing. And any of these layers that are in this tray down here can be used to make a prescription map. But really, when we have yield and protein, we want it to start telling a story. And that's really where we've really pioneered and pushed the yield by protein field performance maps. It's been a really innovative way to review the fields and those crop performances. So we've got some analytical tools which can crunch this out for you. But really what that brings together is simplifying that data into 4 zones. So we'll get the low yield, low protein in red, the high yield, low protein in yellow, the low yield, high protein in blue, and the high yield, high protein, or that being the target, in green. So that becomes a quick snapshot of working back through where we're saying that blue zone, why was that low yielding? Was it moisture limited, or was there a frost or something there that's driving that? These maps help us ask the right questions of the right zones to then improve on that. And that's where I love the grower being more connected with these prescription maps. Yes, you can get anyone to or get a third party to create the maps for you, and they can crunch through that, usually sit down and review it with you as well. But as a farmer, I think you're there seeing that crop grow and having impact on that future performance is really important as we go through some of this data management and having been connected with the impact that you can have. Because if you don't track this year on year, how do you know what sort of improvement you're getting? So any of these maps can be turned into a prescription. So simply in here, a layer like this, we can hit the plus, create a grid or contour map. We can come through here, select the year, select the crop type it's going to. So for this one, say wheat, select a implement, which you can set up, seeder or spreader, product like urea. And then we can also orientate A/B lines. Might touch on that with Broden's account, but when he speaks later on. But you can also bring that into snap to those. You do go next, and yes, there's obviously cloud-based computing, so that data just shoots off to the cloud and will be created in a can range from 30 seconds through to a couple of minutes, depending on the server speed at the time. Then once that map is created, it will sit here as a map here, which we can then assign rates to. So this being a urea map, we can then push and hold there and edit the layer and assign the rates. So typically, where do we start on this? What we like to do is really think about that I guess from a starting point, our target zone is that green zone. So that's performed relative to the rate of fertilizer we put on it year before. So for argument's sake, if that's say 100 kilos, the blue zone has been that moisture limited zone or the lower yielding zone, whether it was frost or moisture limited, something has caused that to be lower yielding. So it's had generally less removal of nitrogen from that crop, which means generally it's got higher nitrogen still in the soil. So that might get a reduced rate of urea. So that might be, say, down to 70 kilos. Then the high yield, low protein, got the yield, didn't have the nitrogen to park into protein. So that's where we can also put in more nitrogen in those zones because they're generally lower in the soil. So that might be 130. Then we've got the low yield, low protein zones. We want to be asking the question of those zones, why is it both low yield and low protein? Quite often they can be only just on the borderline. So we'll still be nitrogen responsive. I've had other zones which have also been, say, low in phosphorus or potassium as well, and really put a handbrake on that yield potential, which is why it's fallen lower than average. So it's potentially asking the question of that zone and finding out why, but that might land in the middle. Then we can save those rates, and that will be created as then a prescription map that is ready to either export directly to the machinery portal, which is currently undergoing some maintenance at the moment, but we can also access the raw shape files from our portal, which I'll go into shortly. Yes, we have a strong focus on nitrogen. Nitrogen is the key lever around protein management, but what the Engage app can do by crunching the numbers on these maps, we can get other data layers out of that. And one of those is the nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur removal, which can be a really handy tool for replacement maps. So we can use these, which is more driven off the yield side of things, which we can create a prescription map on and send them create a prescription based on phosphorus, like an MAP application, and like was touched on the video, gypsum or lime as well. So we can create these maps to do more than just nitrogen, not just get transfixed on that. So when we create those, we can go into these zones. And when we have a look at some of the rates, we can edit that. And this is raw phosphorus removal, so elemental phosphorus removal. And when we start thinking of wheat removal, we're sort of thinking around 3 or so units per tonne, depending on your zone. If you've done your own testing, might range sort of from 2.5 to 3.5 units of P per tonne. So we think of MAP being a 1022. So yeah, 22 units of P and 100 kilos. This is essentially mapping that back out. So we can say in this lower yielding area or lower removal zone, we can probably put like 80 or 90 kilos, maybe like 85 kilos to put on our 18 or so units of P, and then might be so around the 100 units here, 100 kilos of MAP, and then sort of 120 and maybe up to 140, say. And that's how we can simply create these prescription maps that we've then got, say, an MAP map for your phosphorus, and then into the nitrogen in crop. So once you start getting used to any system, it's trying to get the more touch points you have and the more data you can have control over the season, the more impact you can overall have on, obviously, phosphorus is a key driver for setting up your yield as well as your nitrogen. Then your nitrogen is just that next layer to come in that you've got to keep nursing through the system. So thinking about where your system might be falling short is a really important piece for what data layer you might be wanting to utilize. So that could be done on multiple fields, and quite often we'll just work through the system. Benefit of this, you can be sitting there still watching the footy and churning out some maps as you go, which is always a key win. And you can see the variation that happens through a farm when we start looking at these different performance maps. And we can do that for canola, we can do that for wheat and cereals, all through your program and working through that. So when we start looking at that data to export, like I said, we can either export through the app directly to a portal, or all of our data is actually sitting in a cloud server, and it's sort of like a Dropbox account that you get access to for all your data. So every time your CropScan's collecting data, it's storing it up in the cloud here, storing your protein and your yield if it's collecting off the combine as well. But in here is where our management zones or our urea maps are created. So that's where we'll get that information stored and have those maps that we were just creating, that MAP map and urea map, and we can simply tick those maps and export. They'll then download, and you'll have them available for you to access. So really simple to then put that onto a different screen or manage that as required. So really getting that data flow to occur, and not everyone's all within one ecosystem, might have different screens. So having that access to shape files, which can be easily accessible, as well as a independent tool there, such as Engage, which is happy to create files to send to different locations, is a great system to utilize. No matter what we do, we've got some simple tips and tricks, and we're happy to share some more around as well. But just from this outset, if you are thinking about going this journey, maybe if you're new to this journey, start thinking about your own machinery portal and get it set up. And the simplest thing is to start standardizing your digital farm. And when we talk about that, your grower, farm, field, and your boundaries. And get that standardized. Don't have different names, some with caps, some with lowercase. Just standardize it, spend the time in front of the computer and get that bit right. Good little cheat code is that if you do need to add fields or make an amendment in the field, generally when you do that on the screen in any in-cab display, it'll be with caps lock, like it'll be all in capitals. So you know that is an amendment that's been made in the field, where your lowercase at the start and high uppercase at the start of the word and then going to lowercase will then be more of a, you know, that's your master sitting in the background. We'll say with some farm names, there are some pretty creative ones out there. What we try and avoid is use any slashes, commas, question marks, underscores, which can throw out some of the coding language that sits in different softwares in the background. That's keeping it relatively simple on grower farm field. Use dashes over underscores and that sort of thing is a better option. Do get your agronomists connected. They're really keen to be connected with some of your data, but often it falls down in that farm and that agro being connected, just added to your account. With a CropScan, you can register your CropScan as soon as it shows up, and we can then be more touch type with helping and supporting you, and you can be on some of the information flow, because quite often we can be quite disconnected from the grower because it's a sale that's happened through a dealer network, and we often don't get the pleasure of dealing with the end CropScan user, but really keen to keep that information supported and flowing. And those APIs and connections from our account to the machinery portal can happen at any time. You can set it up now and get that all sorted. Critically, with all of this data set up, is the one thing to really remember is a critical quote from Ian Beecher-Jones, who's done a lot of work in with us, has been data will go automatically wrong before it goes automatically right. So making sure all of this is set up right in the first place ensures that if something does come awry later on, it's going to be that last link in the chain, not something that's crumbled back at the start.
Thank you for joining today's webinar. We hope you found this informative and enjoyable. Please find more CropScan videos and webinars on our website cropscanag.com and our YouTube channel.